Welcome to Agile Coaches Corner by Agile Thought, the podcast for practitioners and leaders seeking advice to refine the way they work and pave the path to better outcomes. Now, here's your host, coach, and Agile expert, Dan Neumann.
Welcome to this episode of the Agile Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Dan Neumann, and I'm here with Mike Guiler. Again, Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing, and thank you for the invitation.
I love it. Always welcome. Excited to have you here. We have been spending some time, you, me, some colleagues, really focusing in on a software development lifecycle. And as I say that, I think listeners might be going, oh God, that sounds really waterfall.
Did we go back to the dark side?
Did we? Well, I don't think so.
I would agree. I think it's one of those things that oftentimes we don't. In the Agile community, they kind of skip over this. Like, hey, let's just go write some user stories and start running a sprint. And kudos, let's get to that as quickly as possible. But you need to get started on the right foot.
You need to get started on the right foot. Need to stay on that right foot. If you're aligning with other people in your organization, stakeholders, people with money, other teams, it does make sense to have some coherence about how you go about the delivery cycle. We don't need 100% the same thing because everybody's context varies, but we do need some alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so starting with, how do you identify your stakeholders? How do you sit down? What are their vision? What are their goals? What are we trying to achieve? Just to make sure that we are all, if you will, singing from the same hymnal. We know what they're looking to achieve and that we have the capabilities of actually achieving that.
I think there was a blog post. I know there was a blog post. I'm 99.5% sure it was by Esther Derby. And the title was something like Miss the Beginning, Miss the End. And it was talking about the importance of getting efforts, whether it's a project or a product, doesn't really matter, but it's about getting started in a way that allows you to be successful. And that's where you and I this week especially have been talking about that phase as an inception activity. Because you can talk about requirements, design, deliver. Now that does start to feel very waterfall, but inception, getting started on the right foot.
Exactly. And if we want to tie this back to like the Scrum framework, what a great way to to help the product owner land on their product goal. To me, these align beautifully. And oh, by the way, we get the added benefit of the stakeholder shaking their head going, yep, that at a high level, that's kind of what we're thinking about. We've got a much better chance now, to your point, when we get a few sprints down the road, we've actually beginning to achieve this. They're seeing actual value. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. One of those activities then as part of Project Inception you were mentioning is getting the vision and goals identified. So who are your stakeholders? Hopefully you can get a critical mass of them in the room, especially anybody who maybe would be a key ally or somebody who would be a detractor or a risk of misalignment between those, and really work to define what's the vision or the goals for this project and or product.
As we were working through this week, it occurred to me, I was like, I can't begin to tell you the number of times I've started running a sprint and I went, we need to schedule a sprint review. And I went, who in heaven's name am I supposed to invite to this thing? Obviously, the Scrum team, that's easy, but who are the stakeholders? How do we identify that? And I thought, well, that's probably a really good indication that I'm not getting us started particularly well when we start. We've got to identify the right people and get them in and not just, I've been where, we even went to the extreme of going, for this product backlog item, it's this person or this group of people. And okay, but it needs to get a little broader than that. We definitely need those people that gave us that, this is what you need to do. Yes. But when it's a little richer, you get different opinions, and those differing opinions may lead us to better outcomes. So, broadening that is important, I think.
I love the concept of broadening it. And as you were describing that, it reminds me, we had somebody we both know, they'll remain nameless, but at one point they said, they actually have what their term was, a dossier on each of their stakeholders. And I thought, oh man, that sounds deep state kind of conspiracy things, but they really went to great effort to understand who are my stakeholders, even some of their outside of work things they care about, outcomes they want, political interests within the company. And I thought, once I got past my discomfort of, oh, that feels a little creepy, I'm like, that actually probably makes sense. And this person was a tremendously good manager of other stakeholders, bringing them along, making sure they felt valued, handling any objections. It was tremendously valuable. So identifying and analyzing those stakeholders, maybe to a degree people haven't done in the past.
Yeah, the more we know about the people, the better we can interact, we can connect with them. They'll share more with us. It's a win-win. Does it take a little time? Sure, it does. But you spend that time, the value starts to come out and become realized very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And those can be emergent. You don't have to necessarily have all the stakeholders. If we knew everything up front, waterfall would be an amazing process. So things will unfold. Organization structures will change. The way a company chooses to reward or incent people will change. That's going to create some unexpected behavior. So not only getting clear on the vision and the goals of the product, but then understanding your stakeholders and staying up to date with any changes that might happen in that landscape.
It occurs to me that the better we know our stakeholders, that will just lead us into understanding scope better, because we'll be able to, define it. We'll be able to ask more probing questions because we'll know more about them. And not just work stuff, life stuff will also lead you to that, to that kind of knowledge enables us to begin to ask more probing questions, which leads to a richer product backlog items, and ultimately better outcomes. So, that's time really well spent.
For sure. And you started to talk about one of the other facets of getting the Inception off on the right foot, which is that scope definition. What's in and what's out. So getting very clear, because I don't know how many times I could tell you, somebody says, oh, well, I thought, and fill in the blank, and that gap is going to cost time, money, relationships. That's where things often go very wrong, is when somebody thought something was in. So getting really crisp on, no, this is, as best we understand on, today, this is what's in and this is what's out.
And I love the fact that you called out relationships, especially if you're coming from outside or even really inside, it doesn't really matter. How quickly can a relationship go south of when, we get into that, well, don't you remember we talked about this conversation? Because we've all had that. Or, hey, at lunch, we jotted this down. Don't you remember? Well, okay, I'm a man of a certain age at this point. Maybe I don't remember anymore. But, building those relationships and then coming up with techniques. So, I know we've talked about story mapping, how do you write great PBIs or user stories if you like that model. But making it visual so that they being our stakeholders, your team, everybody are like, this is what our target. We've got a great product goal because we did that up front. Cool. Now we start to bring that product goal to life via some lightweight visualization techniques. Story maps come to mind. And now your product backlog becomes something it's emergent and it's coming to life. And this is the part that I think again we can fall back into our agile ways of working. Now it's really time to start to deliver some value to our users, and we don't need to spend an inordinate amount of time up front to get a full product backlog. Don't need to do that. Do we need to have a high level? Yeah, got to have that. But we can start now delivering value and getting real feedback and reinforcing to our stakeholders, we heard you. Is this on the right path? It's really powerful.
It is. And organizations are probably derelict in their duties if they just hand a team $1 million and go, give us something for that. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's just flat out, that's not going to happen. So you need some expected outcomes, some desired scope definition. Now, where the agile stuff comes in is, do we respond to change? Do we collaborate with our customers? And do we deliver working software over comprehensive documentation? Yes, document it. We talk about a lot of stuff. There's a lot of ideas that's not all going to become agreed to scope for now or for the near future. So just a little bit of rigor can go a tremendously long way around defining scope.
Yeah, absolutely. And it allows us to have a great conversation to identify, so what is in, what is out, up front, and we can all align pretty quickly, or at least agree to disagree, because we've all had that, right? Where it's like, oh no, we've got to have that. Well, if time and money, okay, but what's got to come out? And we can have those conversations, especially if we built the relationships up front.
For sure. And because that scope is ordered, if we're using the Scrum framework, now we're trying to deliver increments, we capture some value. And when the market shifts, the big boss has a different idea, it makes no more sense to invest in it. Now we're ready to pivot off to something else. So
Exactly.
awesome. Good stuff for Inception. So we've got outcomes that we want. We have a sense for our stakeholders. We have a sense for scope. We also need to make sure we understand our risks in a project. And again, without risks, highly predictive approaches would be just fine because nothing would ever go wrong and come up and bite us in the backside. So we should probably be talking about risks pretty early on.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. But for me, the scope definition, the more information we can get, and it's about finding that right amount. Absolutely. That will lead us and inform our conversations around what risks do we see. I'm imagining, I'm a big fan of story mapping. I'm imagining technical people in the conversation and hearing, oh, we need to do this whiz bang. Wait, we've never done that whiz bang in our entire life. There's a risk here. We don't know that. Or, hey, we're moving to the cloud. We're going to use Azure. Oh, we've never used that cloud before. There's some risk here. You can begin to tease these things out and make them very clear to everybody that, we're going to have to spend more time here than maybe we might think we need to spend because we've never done this, or we've done it. It hasn't gone particularly well in the past. So more rigor here, and making that clear to your stakeholders and constantly bringing that information back throughout the process as we're beginning to, one of the beautiful things about Scrum is you reduce risk because you can begin to start to iterate over that and start to, if you will, peel the onion and dig into it. And you can communicate that back in a really meaningful way because, for example, maybe in one of our early sprints, we put up a prototype up on the cloud. And we said, oh, look, we now know how to do these things. We can deploy well. You're seeing a login screen, whatever the heck it is. And the stakeholders, they don't just see some, RAID log go from, red to yellow. They see it going, to yellow. And, oh, by the way, here's working software to prove this. It's not just we hope or we think. We've done it. Amazing.
Oh, yes. Oh, man, RAID logs. So risks, assumptions, issues, dependencies, getting clear on what those are. And with agile methods, we tend to pull the risk forward. We're not going to eliminate all of the risks. One of the things, I got introduced to the concept within SAFe, and it's not a safe thing because SAFe largely borrowed a lot of concepts from all over, but it was called roaming. So is the risk resolved, which means it's no longer a risk? Are you going to own it? Is somebody going to say, I will go try to drive that risk down as low as possible? It is economically sensible as we can be. Are we going to accept it? Yeah, a meteor might hit the earth. We're not going to do anything about it on this project. Like there are risks where you just accept and you move on. You go, yeah, that might happen. If it does, we'll deal with it later. And then sometimes you can mitigate them. Gosh, we have 3 different ways we can do this. If the technology supports the awesome whiz-bang way, that's great. If not, we have a slightly less sexy way of doing it. And then we have this, it's not great, but it'll still work way. So there's discipline around that risk management, making sure that it's addressed.
And think of the power or the benefit you get from making that visible to all the stakeholders. I mean, we've worked on projects where you can't be clear and concise and share this information. We got to hide this information from stakeholders, for example, and that always comes back and bites you. So when upfront you can think about, so how are we going to make this visible? Actually, let's take a step back. Up front, it's not how, it's we are going to make this visible. It's not just something we keep internal. And we're going to dovetail working software with proof that we have mitigated or we've owned or whatever it is. How powerful is that to speak to your stakeholders in not just some Excel spreadsheet or whatever tool you're using for your RAID log, but working software, proof that this is really moving.
Have a topic you want us to tackle? Send an email to podcast@agilethought.com or tweet it with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast.
You've brought up building the transparency, which is definitely a value that I see within Agile methods. And as it relates to risk management, I could see a scenario where a team is upgrading from Java X to Java Y, maybe the newest version of it. If they've not done that before, there's risk. And if they don't externalize the risk somehow, they may have no idea that there are 5 other experts in the company who have already done this. And somebody might say, let me watch out for A, B, and C. Here's how we worked around it. We had a problem here. You might want to be aware. So if you can build the transparency, now you have knowledge sharing within the organization, and you can leverage other smart people in your organization to drive that risk down potentially.
So that's an amazing point, because even in my mind, I'm thinking, inside of my project world, right? I mean, who are my stakeholders? Who are our technical people? But you make an amazing point. What about the entire community outside of your organization? That person who's went from X to Y in Java may not be on your team, but they're still really valuable. So how do we radiate this even further out, building communities of practice or whatever the heck it is, so that you can get those people to go, oh, I've been here, I've done that. Here's a document, or here's lessons learned that we've documented as we went through this. Really powerful stuff.
I love it. So if we've got scope and risk and stakeholders and goals, I guess we just get a bunch of fungible resources and turn them loose.
Well, hey, at least we called them fungible resources, right? Because you didn't want to have any people doing this. But, really, absolutely, right? So now, we've probably got enough going, and ideally, in my mind, this maybe happens a little earlier, because I want my fungible resources in my story mapping activity and those kinds of things.
I assume that came across as pure sarcasm, but just in case, definitely sarcasm.
Definitely sarcasm. There you go.
If I use the term fungible resources, it's definitely sarcasm.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. We can't just throw requirements at a group of humans.
We want to form the teams. We want them in as many of these conversations as we can. We want to make sure that, we know enough about, the product goal, maybe the tech stack, those kinds of things, so that we can build a really effective team. Again, this assumes our team doesn't already exist, or this will allow us, even if the team does exist, if we know a little bit enough about this, we can go, ooh, heavens, we have a huge gap. Maybe the example is, nobody on the team has ever done, Java 16. We might benefit if we found somebody that has those skills, or if we help a team member acquire those skills while we're starting to get going. Taking the team through team formation. So do they have a good working agreement? Do they understand how we're supposed to release software in this environment, for example? I know I've gone to organizations, come as part of a team with Agile Thought and went, wow, we have no idea how to release this sucker. Would be nice if inside of the team formation exercise we went, how do we release? What are the rules for this client on releasing software? Who do we talk to? Who's got to sign off? All of those care and feeding of a team, really important.
Definitely. And one of the things that differentiates a team from a group of individuals is that shared outcome. We can't just have apparently it's Java day, but you can't just have the Java specialist and the quality specialist and the business analyst and the architect all heads down on their specialty saying, well, I got the architecture right. It was the developer who screwed it up, or we would have been on time, but the testers didn't. So doing team formation activities, making sure that we are all in this together. We have a shared outcome. And yeah, I've met a lot of developers who don't like to test. You're fully capable of helping validate the stuff that you're writing. We don't want you to do it independently, but we do have a way to collaborate. And if the architect's architecting things that the team can't build, well, they're failing too. So let's just, as scrum masters, as leaders, stakeholders, making sure the teams are forming and taking some time to move beyond fungible resources within their specialty and off to actual team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a great point. Part of this is shared ownership of this, of the outcome, not of the architecture, testing, Java, whatever the heck it is. Great. All those things are unbelievably important, but it's really the outcome that the business is looking to achieve. And all of our teammates have got to accept that it's all about the outcome. And that might take some training, some coaching, whatever it takes. But, at the time we begin to sprint, everybody on that team should be like, yep, I get it. This PBI that we took as a team, we have to deliver. And it's all about the outcome. It's not about my little piece.
Hey, I got a quiz for you because I can't remember. We'll see. Quote, planning is essential. Plans are useless. I forget who said that. It kind of comes to mind. Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan until you hit him in the mouth. I think that was Mike Tyson, the philosopher.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I mean, there's variations of that. Almost every general in the world has said a version of that. I don't know that. There is a version of that comes from Germany back, I don't know, hundreds of years ago. But yeah, so, all plans, what is that saying? All plans cease upon enemy engaging the enemy, or some version of that.
Interesting.
So you've got it's super important. You've got to have a plan, but the reality is that when we start to iterate over this, that plan's got to be adjustable, right? We've got to take information in and pivot accordingly, making sure that our stakeholders are aligned and understanding. So what's going on? So great. We put together a plan based off of what we knew. And then we started iterating, and, we were talking about, big risk in the cloud. We put it on the list. And then as we started to play with it, we went, oh my goodness, it's even worse than we thought. We need, a different whiz bang, whatever the heck it was, right? Well, that information's got to come back through. Again, if you're using the Scrum framework, the sprint review is a great place to share these kinds of lessons learned. And then thinking about taking that information back into now we need to adjust the plan. And maybe that plan adjustment is okay, this is going to take a little bit longer, but now we need, maybe some functionality needs to come out. Maybe we must be in prod on this date for whatever reason. Great. This is a risk. What do we do? Maybe some functionality needs to come out or whatever. But because we're making the RAID log visible, because we're making increments and we're being unbelievably transparent about what's going on, now we get to have a great conversation. Oh, by the way, and had a nice plan, right? That was where we were, right? We had a nice plan. Now we can begin to have great conversation about what do we do? How do we achieve the goal that we set out with the new information we're getting today?
Love it. So a high-level project plan, having a roadmap, milestones are okay. Where I see a lot of pressure sometimes on teams who want to do agile things, collaborate with their customers, respond to change, etc., is if it's not a trusting or even maybe a high trust type of situation, now we're out trying to stick it to each other with statements of work and scope. And no, you said this was in, and I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. All those low trust behaviors. And I like that you just referenced increments, because getting working software created goes a long ways towards creating that trust. It's no longer, well, I know you spent 3 months on requirements and 2 months on design, and I promise that we're still on track for this 12-month project.
Yeah.
You're probably not.
If you are, it's by accident, not by design, right? But it's so important. I thought you made a really good point there. If we go all the way back to the beginning, we've begun to build the relationships with our stakeholders. We've gotten to know them. We've heard them. They're beginning to see working software, and we've made our risks very visible to them. Now, when the bad thing happens to a really good team, you have a much better chance of having an amazing conversation around how do we pivot? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a pivot. Even in we go back to the waterfall world. There was always a pivot, always something, and sometimes, and generally in my experience, it was something we did behind the scenes. We didn't necessarily make it particularly apparent. For example, my classic, every time we got behind on the project, we went to the QA team and went, yeah, okay, the plan, was 4 weeks of QA. You now get 2. I'm sure it'll be fine, but don't tell anybody. We're not moving any, the milestone, to UAT didn't change. We're going to make that now.
It's a time-honored tradition of dysfunction. It's
exactly.
Sad.
Exactly.
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes, it was an Irish engineer back when I was doing waterfall software development in a consultancy there. We had a dispute over a requirement, and I'm like, it's a change request. I was managed. It'll cost you, $50,000, $100,000. It was a change. And this Irish guy goes, that's what we call the same but different. And I looked at that girl, I'm like, I don't even know what that means. But turns out he meant we split the price, and we ate half of it, he ate half of it, and we moved on. But we had a relationship there. We were able to kind of navigate through that. We probably both owned some responsibility for there being a disconnect, because I'm sure one of those 6 things we talked about to this point didn't quite happen the way it should have. But we were also doing waterfall, and surprises happen. Just like in Agile, surprises happen. That's why we want incremental value and respond to change and things like that. So we're towards the back here. Let's wrap it up. We got a couple, 3 best practices, some tips, and you were just talking about one of them, which is engaging our stakeholders early and often.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't do that, if we just kind of put them off on the side, we're going to pay the price. We don't have a chance to build a relationship. No matter how you decide to deliver, working software in an agile way, a waterfall way, bad things are going to happen. So if we bring them in and we are very transparent with what's going on, now we get to have a chance to have a great conversation with them when the bad thing happens to the good team. Really important. Got to do it.
I love it. Yep. Keep them informed. And it's a feedback loop. Sprint reviews, if you're using the Scrum framework, they're not just demos. It's a chance to say, here's where we are. What do you think? Here's where we're going. What do you think? What's changed? What do we need to be aware of? Love that, because that ties right into the being flexible and adaptable part. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is no team, we work in a complex environment, right? Building software, delivering outcomes to a client. That's complex. That is what it is. We can't know. We can do our best, but the reality is the business is going to change. Something's going to happen. We're going to learn something. There's going to be just a simple misunderstanding. And if we can't adapt, we can't go, okay, maybe I usually use the car analogy. We don't need the BMW, the Ford here will be fine to continue down the path and to achieve, again, if they're in a fixed time model. If we don't do that, we're all going to pay the price.
Absolutely. So we have to be flexible. We have to be adaptable. And that is why we want value delivered early and often, so that we don't just have 6 figures of some sunk cost and a design document to go with it and no actual working software yet.
Yeah, I think for me, we talked about, we at the beginning, we can start, Scrum sometimes people just start and they skip this inception phase. I think this is the one where you got to go, yep, we've got to adhere to the Scrum methodology or thought process around we're going to do incremental value delivery. We're going to order our product backlog, highest things. Sometimes it's not the highest business, but maybe it's the highest risk item that you're talking with the product. We're going to move that up so that we learn this. We can mitigate this problem and learn about it earlier. Got to do that because that reinforces everything we've talked about. We've made everything visible. Everybody knows what's happening. And look, here's a little piece of working software that validates really where we are and that we've, addressed one of the risks.
Oh man, I think back to projects where we've carried the risk that this will either not perform or it won't scale until after QA, and you do load testing and you go, oh,
we were right.
Gosh, that didn't load or scale or perform. And we would have been more agile back, 20 years ago when I was doing that. We could have pulled that forward and go, it doesn't matter what it looks like, or if the table's the right table design, let's set up X, Y, or Z, load the heck out of it and see if this is going to perform. You go, oh, great, this thing does perform the way we'd hoped. Or, no, it doesn't. Now what do we want to do? But man, don't carry those risks around like a pet for a year and hope they don't do something evil in the end, because they will.
They will.
They will. So, Mike, love the exploration of getting projects off on the right step, talking about project inception. We can think of it as a phase, not a waterfall. Make it as appropriately short as possible, I think would be one of the tips. And then any other conclusions you'd like to share? Don't
shortchange it, right? Do this. Lean into the relationship with your stakeholders. Make sure you identify them and know them as best you can. And I will end with that team formation. Get it as early as you can so that these people are available to hear and engage in all of this amazingness.
Outstanding. Thank you for doing that. I don't want to put you on the spot because I think last time you were talking about reading some fiction as your continuous learning journey, which is wonderful.
Still doing that because, hey, there are 5 books in the Song and Fire and Ice.
It's a long one. So I started another audiobook. It was by Deming, and I think it's something like a leader's guide to storytelling. So I started that. I got a few chapters in, which is interesting because he kind of takes some shots at Kotter's change model. And Kotter says, oh gosh, have a burning platform, et cetera. And Deming's basically saying, that's old thinking. Research now says you need a springboard story to help initiate change. So got a little disagreement between thought leaders there. So that's kind of fun. And then he also references Plato's Republic. And I thought, I've heard that before. I wonder what that's like. I don't know how Plato wrote 12 hours worth of audiobook back in the day, but I've started to crawl my way through that too. So storytelling is the theme of where I'm at right now.
So he had a lot to say. There you go.
He did. And it's written off like a conversation. He's like, this person said, then this person, then this. And I'm like, I bet they didn't. Because unless he knew shorthand back then.
Are you calling Plato a liar? Come on.
As much as any author who recounts conversations from memory. Memory's fallible. That's another topic for a different day.
Especially mine.
Yes, same here. Well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And until next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
This has been the Agile Coaches Corner podcast, brought to you by Agile Thought. The views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and the guests, and do not necessarily represent those of Agile Thought. Get the show notes and other helpful tips from this episode and other episodes at agilethought.com/podcast.